So thank you all for joining me again. Week 9 is kind of we're over halfway through. That's always great, the semester. So we're kind of headed into the tail end. But there's still a lot going on. Couple of notes that I want to mention right off the bat. So week 9 is all about content and writing for digital marketing. So you'll be seeing some content on. You should be seeing some tips about how to write good content, how to get up and running, all those kinds of things. Why am I still not running? Hold on a second. Checking. It says it's streaming, but I don't see it. Okay, there we go.
I want to mention right off.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so got it up and running. Okay, so week 9, as I mentioned, is about content and writing. So it's about how to write the content. So videos 1 through 7 will be about that. There's also a special video this week where I did an interview with Amit Vivas, who is at Optimove, and talk a lot about marketing and AI and personalization. So I recommend taking a look at that to see what kind of the future of marketing looks like. So next week, by the way, is spring break. So I won't be doing any office hours. I won't be doing any announcement. But feel free to shoot me an email. Let me know. And when we get back, week 10, right after spring break, will actually be a week for you to meet one with me. In other words, each of the groups will meet with me, and so I don't have any assigned material. It's mainly just a week for me to chat with you. So on the Moodle and on the email you should have gotten today, there was a doodle poll, so you can request a time slot. If none of those times work for you, so this is in 2 weeks, then let me know, and I will make additional times available. The other thing I want to mention is to please fill out the mid-course survey, right? That's up online, and I'll be taking a look at that over spring break to see if there's anything I can do to course correct. And then most importantly, probably for many of you, is that the analytics exam will be passed out on Wednesday, and you'll have 2 weeks to work on that. So I give you spring break kind of off if you want it, and it'll be due the Wednesday after spring break. So make sure and look for that Wednesday morning. Finally, chapters 9 and 15 are the appropriate chapters when talking about content and marketing. So those are the big comments, questions, etc. for this week. I did have a couple of questions that came in via email, and so I wanted to kind of mention a couple of those. So J. Michael asked, he noticed that whenever he searches for any Democratic candidate by name, Michael Bloomberg is the first site to show up. What is their protocol for SEO and political campaigns if you're able to outbid every other candidate for their own search term? Are there any regulations about PAC spending? So as far as I know, right, the traditional thought that Google and Facebook and Twitter say is that they are not media companies, they are technology companies. And so as a result, a lot of the rules that would apply to a media company in terms of what you can and can't advertise for, right, don't apply on Google, Facebook, etc., right, in terms of political rules. So my knowledge is that there is no real guidelines, right, to prevent you from outbidding companies. Now, Jim Michael says SEO, and I do want to point out SEO, that phrase tends to be used for search engine optimization. In other words, making sure that your website is the first natural occurring one that shows up. That you can't really control with money. I mean, you can to some extent. You can have people who just write really good content for you, right? But you can't just buy the top search result, right? The top organic search result. However, when it comes to search engine marketing or pay-per-click advertising, that you can buy the top one, right? You can just outbid everybody else, as he mentions, right? And I'm not aware of any regulations specifically about Google search ads when it regards to PAC spending. Of course, there are generic rules for all advertising for political campaigns, and so those would still apply, right? Like ones where he has to have and I endorse this message and things like that for the appropriate campaigns, right? But as far as I know, there are no special rules for digital, but maybe there should be, right? And that's an interesting question. Okay, I think there was There was one other question that came in about grades for top hat posts, right? And I want to kind of quickly comment on this. You're not going to see any grades. The way Top Hat works is you just get participation or no participation. So the grade book is going to say ungraded, but it's going to show you that you have participation, hopefully, right? And so at the end of the semester, if you've participated in at least 70% of the Top Hat posts, right, then you automatically get the full credit for participation. Otherwise, you get whatever your percentage is. So if you're at 69%, you get 69%, right, for the participation score, right? So it's worth it to make sure you get that 70%. So but there is no grade. It's just whether or not you participate at all. You don't get more points for writing better or worse answers. I do have Kimberly check to make sure that you're writing an answer that's not just that has required some thought, right? That you didn't just write, oh, the same thing as Bob said above, right, or something like that. But other than that, it's just kind of did you make the standard threshold? Okay. Let's see if there's any other questions I got. And I'm double checking real quick, scanning my notes. Not much else. The only other question I had was specific to someone's conceptual assignment, but it did remind me, right, that all the conceptual assignments should be graded and turned back to you now. If you have any questions about those, let me know, okay? And we're going to start working on the situation analysis next, okay? So thanks, everybody, for that. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I realized I forgot to do one thing real quick. Okay. So other things to talk about this week. So the other thing I want to talk about is social media and anti-vax. And once we're done with that, I'll recap what you're working on this week, and that's it. So if you are watching live, right, and have a question for me, then now would be a good time to post it, right? Otherwise, I won't see it necessarily. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about anti-vax. Seems maybe a little bit relevant given the coronavirus outbreak, even though most of this is not anything to do. There is no vaccine for the coronavirus outbreak right now, but that's kind of interesting. We did have a small discussion in my class today about the coronavirus's effect on the sale of Corona beer, which is interesting, right? But take a look at, apparently about 40% of Corona drinkers say they won't drink Corona beer right now. Because they're worried about catching the coronavirus. Just so all of you know, right, you cannot catch the coronavirus from Corona beer, just to make that perfectly clear, right? But anyways, we had an interesting discussion about how maybe they can handle that or how maybe they should address that. Didn't come up with any great solutions, right, out in the class, but it is an interesting scenario that Corona is having to deal with right now. And, a lot of it would have to be probably creating good content that differentiates the beer from the coronavirus would be the best solution out there. I'm missing that. Let's look at it. Okay. There was one particular incident where apparently they didn't, this might have been a canned tweet set up years ago, or set up weeks ago, right? But the Corona tweeted out that one of their new, I don't know if it was a new bottle size or a new flavor or something like that, was spreading like wild, right? And that obviously caused a little bit of an uproar, right, over what was going on. There we go. Okay. Sorry for the delay. Got it now. Okay. Bring this up. Revenue. Okay, key. There it is. Okay, here we go. Okay, make sure. Let me put this up here. Let me turn off my view. Right, and bring it up for you. So this reading, if you remember correctly, was about the fact that both Pinterest, that Pinterest had recently decided to ban all uh, content related to anti-vax, right? Not ban the content necessarily, but any search for it would result in going to other places, right? Going not go to the anti-vax content itself, right? Um, so the question is like this becomes an interesting news story, right? Firms are going to have to figure out how to deal with the fact that is potential that some of I'm not saying that there's firms out there that necessarily were doing a lot of anti-vax content, right? But the social media platforms are starting to move content away from certain places. There were at least two large quote unquote scientific groups. I say that because if they're promoting anti-vax, their scientific credibility is really called into deep question. So it did affect a couple of different groups. But how do you how do you work with right these different content? And Facebook recently decided to follow similarly and ban any anti-vax ads, right? So Pinterest has blocked all searches for vaccination-related content. Google and Facebook are both attempting to verify information that's returned as news. So in general, when you think about the fake news question, right, Google and Facebook are both adding different ways to try and verify that content. Google, for instance, altered its autocomplete list to remove references to hate speech terms, right? You don't get terms showing up, which Google was populating automatically, that have anything to do with hate speech. And this is becoming a big problem for the social media companies. The anti-vax one is probably on, how can I put this? It's the least depressing in some respects of some of them, right? But Facebook has hired thousands of regulators, thousands of content monitors to try and remove things like violent content from their websites, right? From their properties, right? And it's become a real issue because really the only solution right now seems to be to use humans to check to see if the content actually violates their policy rules, right? And so that's very difficult for them to do, and it doesn't scale very well, and like an AI solution would. Moreover, an interesting twist, and not something that's delved into in this article, but there's been discussions about how this has a really negative effect on the people who are actually doing the work, right? The people who are actually checking this content often have emotional issues, right? Because they're looking at violent content and negative content over time. So what's the problem with this? Well, the problem is that companies could be automatically swept up in overly broad blocks, right? So this has happened a couple of times in the past where school systems, for instance, have tried to implement filters against adult content, and as a result, they've also blocked out things like on breast cancer, for instance, right? Stuff that we want people to be able to access things, right? And so it's a very difficult scenario where if companies don't do this correctly, even if they're claimed to be doing it in our best interest, they may very well be blocking content that would better serve the public needs. Okay? And you can imagine in the worst possible case, if a firm went really kind of crazy down this path, right, it could result in a pay-to-play scenario where larger firms are able to make sure they're not being blocked, but smaller firms simply don't have the resources, right? So, it's one thing if, let's say, Pinterest accidentally blocks the Mayo Clinic, right, for some reason because they have some discussions about vaccination on their pages, right? But it would be another thing if they blocked like a small mom and pop shop or a small like family doctor. Mom and pop shop probably not appropriate term there. I mean, I guess it could be a mom and dad doctor situation, but blocks a single country physician who has content on their Pinterest page, right? That's vaccine related, right, in some ways, and so they don't have the resources to change Pinterest's mind in that space. So why did Pinterest do this? Well, a number of reasons, right? At the time, they were working on their IPO, right, which launched in April of last year, right? And so this was kind of one way for them to kind of show that they could control the content, right? And they didn't want investors worried about the fact that there was a lot of conspiracy theories and anti-vaccination theories on their blogs. Facebook was sued at about the same time for disinformation, right, which kind of pushed them to kind of try and lock that down a little bit more. And truth be told, the reason why investors are worried about this is that if a platform is seen as a focal of disinformation, right, then advertisers may not view that platform as very valuable, right? Some of the most notorious, really bad uh, um, social media sites like Gab and 8chan and things like this, they have a hard time monetizing what they're doing beyond getting money from private donations, right? So they can't appeal to this overall broader base, right? Which makes them highly dependent upon individual channels, right? And so advertisers are likely to leave a platform in these cases. Um, and there's also the idea, consumers may boycott a platform if there's too much controversial content right there. So check something out. Try and experiment this. One thing I suggest that you do at home to kind of experiment this is do a Google search for non-traditional cures for cancer, right? On Google, Facebook, YouTube, and Pinterest, and look to see what different results you get, and kind of try and think about how this the different platforms are kind of affecting this content, right? Like how are they filtering and deciding different cases, right? And this is an interesting one because there's nothing, unlike anti-vax, which is pretty much scientifically disproven, right? The non-traditional cures for cancer, right? It might very well be that there's some out there that have scientific value, but we just don't know it yet, right? And to a large extent, we know what the best treatment possible is, but it is at least possible that there's other treatments out there that might work better, right? Try and see how each of the different platforms is addressing this kind of content. And if you think about it, if you are a marketing professional who works for a hospital like, say, the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic or even Duke Cancer, right? How might you take into account these different results? So that's kind of something I'm working at home. Now, what did you all say on the chat that we were looking at? So there were some interesting comments, I think, that came in from Top Hat about different kind of concerns and interests in this project, right? So Chris, I really like what he said. He talks about how Chris Gabler talks about how this is being done to reduce anti-vaccine information, but he's worried, though he's not interested, he's not, I'll just read it. I'm obviously not for spreading misinformation of any kind, especially when public safety is involved, but this does create a simpler soap. Once you open the door, I'll turn back on my video, right? Once you open the door for controlling information where it is stopped, could eventually lead to Facebook and Pinterest only promoting causes or products that they endorse. That does sound extreme, but rules and laws always start off with the best of intentions and tend to sour in time. I mean, I agree with you to a large extent, Chris. I do feel like that the slippery slope doesn't apply all the time because we're always making compromise. We're always making changes. And so a lot of times my argument, if you're worried about a slippery slope, but you decide that this was a good decision, right, that controlling this, then you should figure out how to prevent the slippery slope, right? Put your resources into that rather than worrying about the slippery slope itself. So maybe we should ban anti-vax content, but we shouldn't ban other types of content. So how do we make that happen, right? Or is there a policy we can put into place that says that this is a very rare occurrence, right? And I think that's why we would look at it. So Jeffrey went on to say that YouTube, for instance, has a relatively lax user policy and thus has taken seller measures to reduce the spread of amount of misinformation, such as limiting the visibility and reach of the content that is deemed to misinform users. Fewer than 1% of their videos fall into this category and still be found if searched for directly. They'll be less likely to show up in general recommendations. So that's an interesting content. So he's arguing YouTube has done kind of a more soft-hand approach. They're not banning the content from the searches, right? But they're basically just redirecting people towards more correct content. And he then discusses that marketers should work with search engines and social media platforms alike to understand the algorithms and to figure out how to not be labeled as misinformation, right? And to provide their content as much as possible. Yeah, I think that's very much the case, right? and then goes on to talk about how social media platforms need to walk a tightrope between providing accurate, credible content while still promoting free speech and the freedom of thought and opinion. I like that idea in general. I mean, my concern is that social media platforms aren't making money off of free speech necessarily, right, by itself. They're making money off of being able to put out these ads, right? And I am concerned a little bit that having the social media, placing the social media platforms themselves in charge of regulating themselves may be problematic, right? Because they don't really have much interest in stopping the spread of content that's making them money, right? If they actually did, as just sorry, this is Jeffrey goes on to say, if they did feel a responsibility to reduce misinformation, both their own credibility among users, but also the potential legal liability, then they would start to slow the spread down. I think that's true, but we haven't seen the legal liability implications come about. We haven't seen people turning away from social media as much as we need in order for that to happen. So finally, Pratik says, social media in the future under social and political pressure will take more automated and proactive steps to please the majority of its audience, whoever it may be. It would also come off as a self-righteous way to sustain its platform. Advertising revenues may take a hit in the short run, but in the long run, the advertising may bid up and only certain campaigns would get a shot. Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if that's the case, right? Could you see social media platforms that spend more and more time controlling their content to the point where they become niche audiences? They essentially become like the different networks are now, where they try and focus on a particular larger audience. Interesting idea, Pratik. So. Okay, so that's it for anti-vax and social media. That's all I wanted to talk about today. Hopefully that was interesting. I do want to go back and talk briefly about what the goal is for this week. So again, you're going to want to watch, oops, not the long notes. You're going to want to watch videos 1 through 7 in week 9, which deals with content marketing. You want to fill out a request for a group time for me to meet with your group on the doodle. Oh, and by the way, I don't think I mentioned this at the top of the hour, but essentially what that is once you fill out that time, I am going to assume you're going to send me a link for a teleconference. So if you want to be on Google Hangouts, that's fine. If it's on Zoom, if it's on Blue Jeans, if it's on Skype, whatever. Though Skype's my least favorite. But, whichever one it is, feel free to choose, and I'll join the teleconference, okay? Also, please fill out the mid-course survey, work on the analytics exam, which will be assigned on Wednesday, and then as optional, go ahead and read chapters 9, 15. Oh, and take a look at the interview with Amit Vivas. One last announcement, of course, there is no office hours or email announcement next week because it is spring break, so feel free to take the time off. Anyways, thank you all, and I look forward to talking to you in 2 weeks. Take care. Bye.